I brought in $2.3 million. They thanked me with a termination letter, right beneath the clock I hung up for a stupid belief in loyalty. The afternoon sun cut through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Weston Dynamics' 25th floor executive suite, casting long, golden lines across the polished marble floors. It should have felt warm, hopeful even. Instead, it felt like a spotlight on a condemned man. And standing there, staring at my own reflection in the tinted glass, I realized, I was that man. Harold Crane sat across from me, reclining comfortably in his custom leather chair like a Roman emperor about to sentence a gladiator to death. His Brioni suit barely wrinkled as he leaned forward and tossed a crisp white envelope onto the mahogany desk between us. The envelope spun once before settling, perfectly centered. Typical Harold. Always about the perfect image. "Darren," he said, smoothing his already flawless silk tie. His voice was calm, like this was just a casual Tuesday conversation. "You're no longer valuable to this team. And we don't keep traitors around." He let the word hang there, traitors, like a rotten scent in the air. For a long second, I didn't move. I could hear the faint ticking of the antique clock mounted above his desk, the same clock I'd gifted the company 2 years ago when we hit our highest quarterly sales. They'd made a big deal about it then. Speeches, champagne, promises of a bright future. I should have known better. I picked up the envelope, not to read it, I didn't need to. The weight of it told me everything I needed to know. I met Harold's eyes, his smug, lifeless shark eyes, and I smiled. Just a small, knowing smile. "Thank you, sir," I said, standing tall, voice steady. "For finally showing me my true worth." His jaw twitched. That wasn't the reaction he was hoping for. I wasn't going to beg. I wasn't going to grovel. And damn sure I wasn't going to break in front of him. Without another word, I turned and walked toward the door. The hallway outside his office felt longer than usual. The open workspace had gone quiet, too quiet. I could feel every pair of eyes on me, the hurried clicks of keyboards suddenly pausing, the hushed whispers traveling like electric current through the air. Some looked at me with pity. Others, with thinly veiled smirks. I caught Greg Summers, the marketing lead, grinning like he just won the lottery. That idiot never closed a deal worth more than a used car, but he loved climbing over the bodies of better men. I went straight to my desk. No dramatics. No angry outbursts. Just precision. I pulled a small cardboard box from under my desk, the same one I'd kept tucked away for years, more out of some strange sense of preparedness than paranoia. I packed my things methodically. A coffee mug my sister bought me that read, "World's Most Underrated Hero." A few pens that hadn't dried out. And the small cactus I somehow kept alive under those flickering fluorescent lights for the last 3 years. For years of my life, and everything I had left fit neatly into a box smaller than a microwave. April, the HR rep, hovered nearby with a jangling keychain and a pair of uncomfortable flats squeaking against the polished floor. She didn't say a word, just watched me like I might suddenly go berserk and start flipping desks. "Don't worry, April," I muttered, my lips curling into a sardonic smile as I placed the last item into the box. "The stapler's safe." Her cheeks flushed, but she looked away. I made the slow walk to the elevators, the box balanced in one hand, my access badge already clutched in the other. Right before the doors slid shut, Colin Hayes, my direct supervisor, the spineless middleman who promised me 3 different times that my raise was in process, peeked out of his office. His tie was loose, eyes darting everywhere but toward me. "Make sure to turn in your badge at security," he mumbled before slinking back into his office like the coward he'd always been. The elevator doors closed. In the polished steel, I caught my reflection. I didn't look broken. Hell, I didn't even look angry. For the first time in months, maybe even years. I looked light. Like I'd just shrugged off 100 pounds I hadn't even realized I was carrying. And standing there, as the elevator descended toward the lobby, something inside me settled. They thought this was my end. They had no idea. This was where the real story started. And I swear, by the time I was finished, Harold Crane would wish he'd never learned my name. The rain started just as I pulled into the crumbling lot behind my apartment building. Typical. A day that had already kicked me straight in the teeth decided it wasn't done yet. I sat there for a while, the wipers beating a tired rhythm against the windshield, watching the water paint streaks over the cracked glass. My apartment window, 5th floor, 3rd from the left, glowed a soft yellow against the darkening sky. For the first time in what felt like years, I wasn't in a rush to go inside. But eventually, with the weight of the day pressing hard against my ribs, I grabbed my box of desk relics and trudged up the narrow stairwell. The apartment door creaked open before I could even reach for my keys. Thought I heard that damn Corolla cuffin' its way into the lot. My father stood there in the doorway, his figure outlined by the warm, flickering glow of the old lamp we'd refused to replace. Arthur Cole, 64 years carved deep into a face that had weathered too many disappointments. His shoulders, though stooped, still carried a quiet strength. And in his eyes, that sharp, cutting blue, I saw a storm brewing. I stepped inside, setting the box down next to the threadbare couch. The familiar scent of his aftershave, cheap Old Spice, stubbornly loyal, hit me like a memory I wasn't ready for. "Rough day?" he asked, though from the look in his eyes, he already knew. I let out a hollow laugh and sank into the couch. You could say that. Harold Crane personally handed me my walking papers this afternoon. Said I'm no longer valuable. Called me a traitor. My father went quiet. That name, Harold Crane, hung in the air like a curse. He moved slowly to the armchair opposite me, the springs groaning under his weight. He poured himself 2 fingers of bourbon and did the same for me. "You ever wonder why that bastard's name makes my skin crawl?" he asked, his voice low, almost a growl. I turned to him, waiting. I'd heard pieces before. Hints. Offhand comments. But never the full story. Arthur stared into his glass, swirling the amber liquid like it held ghosts. 30 years ago, he began, his voice rough like gravel on pavement, I ran the operations division at Hamilton Precision Tools. Back then, I was the guy everyone came to for answers. Built that division from the ground up. Honest work. Clean books. Solid people. He paused, eyes distant, like he was standing in that old factory again. And then along comes Harold. Fresh-faced, ambitious, the kind that smiles too wide and listens too hard. I took him under my wing. Showed him everything, how to manage suppliers, balance the margins, negotiate clean deals. I thought he was eager. Loyal. His jaw clenched, knuckles widening around the glass. But loyalty's just another tool for men like him. He started manipulating expense reports, forging supplier contracts. Slipped in phantom vendors that didn't even exist. By the time I realized, it was too late. The board found his version of the books before I could prove the truth. Guess whose signature was forged on the approvals? A bitter chuckle escaped him. They dragged me through a public audit. I lost everything. My job, my pension, hell, even my good name. And Harold? His eyes snapped back to me, burning. He walked away clean. Took my position, called it stepping up during a crisis. The room felt smaller somehow, the air heavier. I sat there, gripping the whiskey glass so hard my fingers trembled. He destroyed you, I muttered. Arthur nodded slowly. And now he's come for you. Silence settled between us. Outside, thunder rumbled low and distant, like the city itself was brooding over old grudges. Without thinking, I tightened my grip on the glass until it cracked. A thin line of blood welled up where the broken edge bit into my palm, but I didn't loosen my hold. Arthur leaned forward, his voice hard as stone. You listen to me, Darren. You're not the first man that snakes tried to crush under his boot. But by God, you might be the last one who makes him kneel before he falls. I looked down at the blood trickling through my fingers. I didn't feel the pain. Only the raw, searing clarity that comes when you finally see the enemy for what he is. This wasn't just a job lost. This was a war inherited. I stood, crossing the room to the sink, rinsing the blood from my hand. The water ran pink down the drain, swirling away like all the wasted years I'd given that company. I stared at my reflection in the cracked bathroom mirror. Harold Crane thought he'd broken me today. No, today was the day he woke me up. I wiped my hands dry, turned to my father, and raised my glass. To old debts, I said. Arthur stood, clinking his glass against mine. And to settling them, he answered. As the storm outside finally broke, rain hammering the windows with furious intent, a fire lit inside me that no storm could ever extinguish. Tomorrow, I would begin the real work. Tomorrow, Harold Crane would find out what happens when a man has nothing left to lose, and every reason to fight. The morning after that storm felt different. The city seemed to breathe slower, heavier, as if it too was nursing old wounds under gray skies. And for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel the dull weight of helplessness pressing against my chest. Today, I wasn't crawling back into the rat race. I was stepping onto the battlefield. By 9 a.m., I walked through the glass doors of Granville Publishing. Granville wasn't like Weston. No pretentious marble floors or sterile white walls. Instead, it felt alive, industrial brick interiors mixed with open spaces and natural light. A place that still believed in building something real. Selina Brooks was waiting for me in the executive lounge on the second floor. She stood by the wide window, arms crossed, a sharp silhouette against the city skyline. In a world full of people playing roles, Selina played for keeps. Darren Cole, she greeted, her lips curving into a knowing smile as she turned. The man of the hour. I stepped forward, shaking her hand firmly. Her grip was strong, no nonsense. I heard you like to solve problems, she added, motioning for me to sit. I'm better at creating them for the right people, I said, sitting across from her. That made her laugh, low, confident, and dangerous in all the ways I respected. Good, she said, sliding a folder toward me. Because Weston's legal department wasted no time. You're officially in violation of a non-compete agreement you allegedly signed 3 years ago. And, of course, they're threatening litigation. I opened the folder. My signature stared back at me from a document I had no memory of signing. Clean. Precise. Damn near perfect. But I hadn't signed this. And they knew it. Selina leaned in, her eyes sharp as blades. We both know this is bullshit. The question is, how do you plan to fight back? I met her gaze evenly. We don't play defense, I told her. We hit first. That night, I combed through my old emails, digging for anything I might have missed. And then I found it. A performance review meeting scheduled exactly 3 years ago. Standard HR paperwork had been handed to me that day, with sticky notes marking where to sign. I'd signed every flagged page without question, rookie mistake. What I didn't realize back then was that Harold had slipped additional pages into the stack. That's when the forged non-compete agreement must have been added. I clenched my fists, my knuckles widening. They thought I was the same man who would swallow his pride and walk away quietly. Not this time. 2 nights later, I arranged a casual, coincidental, meeting with Colin Hayes at Mercer's, a swanky downtown bar where the city's middle managers like to play pretend kings. Colin showed up exactly on time, nervous, twitchy, but still clinging to that faint hope that his tie and overpriced whiskey made him relevant. I ordered him another round before he even sat down. Relax, Colin, I said smoothly, leaning back against the leather booth. This isn't about Weston. It's just 2 old colleagues catching up. His eyes darted toward the exit, his drink trembling slightly in his hand. I smiled and casually adjusted the cuff of my shirt, knowing full well the tiny recording device sewn into my button was live. "Tell me, Colin," I said, swirling my glass, "do you ever wonder how many times Harold set you up without you even knowing it?" His face went pale. "Listen, Darren. I don't want any part of this," he stammered. "You're already part of it," I shot back. "And you're drowning in it. The forged documents, the phantom commissions, the manipulated expense accounts. How long do you think you'll stay clean once the investigators start asking real questions?" He swallowed hard, sweat starting to bead along his hairline. "Harold promised it was all routine," Colin muttered, almost to himself. I leaned in, my voice low but sharp. "Routine like getting people to sign blank pages during performance reviews and filling in the fine print later?" His eyes darted to mine, panic blooming across his face. I pressed harder. "How many times, Colin? How many careers did Harold destroy before he started cutting you in?" He broke. "It wasn't just me," he whispered, his voice cracking. "Everyone at that level knew. Harold had his hands in every major deal, skimming commissions, doctoring numbers. He called it the executive tax. If you played along, you got a slice. If you didn't, you ended up like you. Or worse." I sat back and let him unravel himself, every word being recorded perfectly. By the time Colin stumbled out of Mercer's that night, I had everything I needed. But as it turned out, the game was about to get a lot more complicated. 2 days later, a plain, unmarked envelope slid under my apartment door. No return address. No explanation. Just a folded note inside. "Do you really trust Henry Whitmore? Meet me at Waverly Garage. Midnight. Come alone." The handwriting was deliberate, blocky, almost mechanical. Part of me knew I shouldn't go. But the rest of me, the part forged in fire these last few weeks, knew I couldn't ignore it either. At 11:55 p.m., I pulled into Waverly Garage. The place felt like a tomb. Concrete pillars stretched up into the shadows, their edges softened by flickering fluorescent lights that hummed like dying insects. I stepped out of the car, the cool metal of the small Glock I'd tucked into my waistband a quiet reassurance against my spine. A figure emerged from the far side of the garage, hooded, face obscured by the shadow. They didn't speak. Just walked toward me, calm, almost casual. When they were 10 feet away, the figure stopped and held out a small black USB drive. "You believe in Henry Whitmore," the voice was low, distorted through some kind of voice modulator. "I'll let you find your own truth." Before I could respond, the figure melted back into the shadows and was gone. Back home, my hands shook slightly as I plugged the USB into my laptop. One folder. One video file. I clicked play. Grainy security footage lit up the screen. A camera angle from what looked like a hotel corridor, time-stamped 3 nights ago. There he was. Henry Whitmore. Meeting Harold Crane outside a penthouse suite at the Hilton. Harold handed him a slim black briefcase. Henry took it, glanced both ways down the hall, and disappeared into the elevator. My stomach twisted. Was this betrayal? Or something deeper? The video ended, the room falling deadly silent except for the faint buzz of my computer's fan. I leaned back, running a hand through my hair. This wasn't over. Not even close. If anything, I just stumbled onto a whole new layer of the game. And whoever the real players were, I was about to sit at their table, whether they liked it or not. The sky over Williamsburg Bridge hung low and bruised, heavy with a storm that had already begun to break over the city in fitful bursts. I stood there at the midpoint of the bridge, rain slashing sideways like sharpened knives, soaking through my coat and shirt, but I didn't care. If anything, the cold helped keep me from losing control. And then he appeared. Henry Whitmore stepped out from the shadows near the south pillar, his face pale beneath the streetlights, water streaming from the brim of his hood. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The rain was loud enough to drown out most rational thought, but not the tension between us. I broke the silence first. You met with Harold, I said flatly. At the Hilton. 3 nights ago. Henry nodded once. Not defensive. Not apologetic. Just, tired. You're wondering if I sold you out, he said. His voice was hoarse, raw from too many sleepless nights and too many secrets carried alone. I'm wondering why the hell you're still standing in front of me if you did. He gave a bitter smile, one that didn't touch his eyes. You think Harold's the real threat? He asked, stepping closer so the rain didn't drown him out. That man's a pawn playing at being a king. Always has been. I clenched my jaw. Then who's been moving the pieces? His eyes darkened, a shadow crossing his already haunted expression. Victor Langford, he whispered. That name landed like a physical blow to the chest. I'd heard the name before, of course. Everyone in the business world knew Victor Langford. The perfect philanthropist. The charming billionaire funding children's hospitals and clean water initiatives in developing countries. And apparently, the man orchestrating one of the biggest corporate fraud networks this side of Wall Street. Henry took a deep breath, wiping water from his face. He runs it all, he continued. Weston Dynamics, the shell companies, the offshore accounts. Harold was just the enforcer. The real empire sits behind Langford's charity dinners and photo ops. You think this non-compete scam was big? It's nothing. He's laundering billions through fake investment projects and bleeding every employee dry in the process. The rain intensified, as if the sky itself couldn't handle the weight of this revelation. I shook my head, struggling to keep my mind from spiraling. Why meet with Harold then? Why risk everything? Henry's eyes locked with mine, full of cold resolve. Because sometimes, to kill a king, you need a pawn to show you where the throne is. He reached into his coat and pulled out a slim folder, protected by a plastic sleeve. This, he said, pushing it into my hands, will lead you there. I opened it just enough to glimpse the contents, account numbers, transfer receipts, names of offshore banks I'd only heard mentioned in whispered conversations between the kind of men who never left a digital trail. I'm done hiding, Henry said, stepping back into the rain. But if you go after Langford, Darren, you better make damn sure you finish the job. Because he doesn't just ruin people, he erases them. With that, he turned and disappeared into the storm. Back at my apartment, I spread the documents across the kitchen table, my mind racing faster than my hands could keep up. If Henry was right, this wasn't just a corporate scandal. It was a nationwide financial crime syndicate hiding in plain sight. I needed backup. Selena Brooks answered my call on the second ring. Tell me you're calling with good news, she said, her voice sharp even through the static of the line. I'm calling with a target, I told her. Victor Langford. There was a pause. I could almost hear her exhale on the other end. Meet me at Granville at 8 a.m., she said. And bring everything. The next morning, the real plan began. Selena didn't flinch when I laid out the evidence. If anything, she looked relieved to finally have a face for the monster she'd spent years chasing in the shadows. We can't just take this to the press, she warned. Langford has friends in every newsroom and courtroom in this country. If we're going to take him down, we need undeniable, irrefutable evidence. I knew exactly where to get it. Weston Dynamics was hosting an exclusive investor conference that week, a closed-door summit for strategic partnerships. Rumor had it Langford himself was flying in under the radar to finalize a massive international deal. The perfect place to catch him speaking candidly. With Selena's connections, we forged the credentials. I would go as Daniel Cross, a representative from a fictional offshore investment firm. The day of the summit, I walked into the opulent ballroom of the Astoria Grand Hotel wearing a custom suit and a face full of calculated indifference. Langford was already there, smiling for cameras he thought were harmless, mingling with foreign investors and corporate sharks. He didn't recognize me, of course. Not in this suit. Not in this skin. By the time the private meeting started, I was sitting in the back corner of a sealed conference room, a hidden recorder tucked beneath my tie clip. Langford stood at the head of the table, laying out his plan in the most casual, horrifying way imaginable. "We move the liquid assets to Grand Caicos by next quarter," he said smoothly. "From there, it cycles through the Bearing Fund and comes back clean. Gentlemen, if you think this is about saving a corporation, you've misunderstood the game entirely. This is about building an empire that can't be touched by borders or laws." He smiled, sipping a glass of aged scotch like he was discussing the weather. My fists clenched beneath the table, but I kept my face a blank canvas. Langford continued, his voice dripping with false benevolence. "Let the regulators chase ghosts while we build legacies. And if a few pawns fall along the way," he shrugged. "That's the cost of doing business." That night, Rachel Kim finally reached out. She met me at a small cafe on the outskirts of the city, her hands trembling as she slid a flash drive across the table. "This is everything," she whispered. "Harold's confession. He admits it all, taking orders from Langford, running the non-compete scam, the forged signatures, everything." I stared at the tiny drive like it held the weight of the entire world. And in a way, it did. By dawn, the evidence was in the hands of federal prosecutors. I'd started this fight alone. But now, I wasn't just fighting for myself. I was leading a war against an empire built on the backs of the people it destroyed. And for the first time, it felt like we might actually win. The storm didn't roll in with thunder this time. It came with the low, almost silent hum of black SUVs pulling up outside Weston Dynamics' towering headquarters. From a vantage point across the street, tucked into the shadows of a parking structure, I watched as agents in dark jackets with yellow block letters, FBI, DOJ, flooded the lobby like a silent tidal wave. This was it. The culmination of every sleepless night, every step through the fire. Selina stood beside me, her arms crossed tight against the early morning chill. Her sharp eyes didn't blink, didn't look away as they escorted Harold Crane out of the building in handcuffs. For a moment, his eyes scanned the streets, searching. Maybe he was hoping to find me. Maybe part of him already knew I was there, watching his empire crumble just like he tried to break me. He didn't find me. And that was the final insult. "They always fall the hardest when they never saw it coming," Selina muttered under her breath. I glanced sideways at her. There was satisfaction in her voice, sure, but something else too. A weariness that went far deeper than this one victory. "Langford?" I asked. She shook her head. "Slipped out on a private jet 6 hours ago. Zurich. Switzerland." I exhaled sharply, my breath fogging the cold air. Of course. But even as he ran, the web was closing. We'd left a trail the best forensic accountants and federal prosecutors could follow. And Langford had left enough blood on his own hands that even Swiss banking secrecy wouldn't save him forever. 2 days later, the fallout began to settle like radioactive dust. I walked into Granville Publishing for what I knew would be the last time. Selina sat behind her desk, the contents of her office already packed into neat, impersonal boxes. She didn't stand when I entered. Just looked up at me with a small, tired smile. "So, this is it?" I asked, my voice rougher than I intended. She nodded slowly. "Pressure from upstairs. Political ties to Weston ran deeper than we thought. Granville wants distance from all this before it drags their name into the mud." "You're just going to walk away?" I asked, hearing the edge creeping into my tone. Selina stood then, crossing the room until she was standing just a breath away from me. "Darren," she said softly, her eyes softer than I'd ever seen them. "Some people are built for endless wars. Some aren't. I've fought long enough. And I'm tired. There's nothing wrong with knowing when to step off the battlefield." She reached up and adjusted the collar of my coat, a surprisingly tender gesture from a woman who'd spent her entire career wielding sharp words like blades. Don't let them turn you into a ghost, she whispered. Win. But don't lose yourself in it. And just like that, she walked past me, through the glass doors, and disappeared into the world outside. I stood there long after she was gone, her words echoing louder than the footsteps and voices that filled the building around me. A week later, the settlement check arrived. $155,000. Payment for years of stolen commissions, forged contracts, and a reputation nearly destroyed. I stared at the check sitting on my kitchen counter for 3 days before I touched it. It wasn't about the money. It was the final acknowledgement that everything they did to me, they failed. But when Granville's board offered me the title of vice president, a sleek office with a view, and a promise of better days ahead, I didn't even have to think about it. I turned it down. I'd spent enough time living under other people's ceilings, playing by rules designed to keep men like me climbing ladders that led nowhere. If freedom had a cost, I was finally ready to pay it in full. That's how Cole Enterprises was born. No grand offices. No shiny marble lobbies or corporate mission statements polished to the point of meaninglessness. Just a small space downtown, above a coffee shop that always smelled like burnt espresso and ambition. My first desk was a beat-up oak table I'd found in a second-hand furniture store. My only employees were the kind of people who had once stood where I did, talented, overlooked, and done with being exploited. We built something different. Transparent. Honest. Profitable, yes, but never at the expense of our people. It wasn't glamorous. But for the first time in my life, it was real. And sometimes, late at night when the city finally went quiet, I'd sit by the window of that small office and wonder where Selina had gone. Whether she found her peace. Whether she regretted walking away before the final move. Or maybe, just maybe, she was waiting for the right moment to step back onto the board and make the move that changed everything. But either way, I knew this. I hadn't just survived. I'd won. And for a man like me, that was worth every scar. The sign outside my office had faded a little under the relentless New York sun. Cole Enterprises, building trust through truth. It wasn't fancy, but every chipped corner and weathered edge felt earned. There was something honest in its imperfection. The world had changed in the last year, or at least, my corner of it had. Langford's financial empire had crumbled in public view. The headlines screamed scandal. Offshore accounts exposed. Board members indicted. Harold Crane had traded tailored suits for an orange jumpsuit and a future defined by concrete walls and razor wire. But Victor Langford? The man himself had disappeared like smoke through a cracked window. His name faded from the headlines as quickly as it had exploded onto them. Some thought he was dead. Others whispered he was quietly rebuilding somewhere far beyond the reach of American law. I didn't know which version was true. And honestly, for a while, I didn't care. My days were spent building something different. Cole Enterprises had become a quiet haven for those burned by the machine, former salespeople, consultants, analysts, people who'd lived through their own versions of my story and vowed to never play the same rigged game again. We weren't just making deals. We were making a point. That you could build success without stepping on the necks of the people who made it possible. And then, just when I thought the past had finally loosened its grip, she walked back into my life. The door creaked open that rainy afternoon, the familiar bell above it chiming a soft, almost nostalgic tune. Selina Brooks stood in the doorway, rain dripping from the edges of her black trench coat, a quiet storm of her own. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Her hair was shorter now, framing her sharp cheekbones. Her eyes still carried that relentless fire, but there was something new beneath it, calculation, purpose. Without a word, she crossed the small office and placed a thick envelope on my desk, followed by a folded contract. She met my eyes and, in that familiar, low voice, said the words that made the room feel 10 degrees colder. Victor Langford has returned. I sat back in my chair, feeling the weight of those words settle in my chest. He's back. I asked quietly, my voice even, but every muscle in my body coiled like a spring. Selina nodded. Rebranded. New shell companies. New investors. But the same playbook. Only this time, he's operating from the shadows, using proxies to build something even bigger than before. Offshore funds. Crypto laundering. He's evolving, Darren. Faster than the law can follow. She pushed the contract toward me. This is a partnership offer. From me. From people who've been waiting for the right moment to strike. And what's in the envelope? I asked, tapping my fingers against the thick, weathered paper. Everything we couldn't prove last time. Names. Accounts. Meeting locations. And the one thread that ties it all back to Langford. I exhaled slowly, eyes fixed on that envelope like it was Pandora's box. Selina stepped closer, her expression unreadable. The board's been reset, Darren. But this time, we don't play by his rules. I looked up at her, a slow, cold smile spreading across my face. This time, I said quietly, we write the rules. That night, long after Selina had gone and the office lights had dimmed, I sat alone with that envelope opened in front of me. Page after page of damning evidence. Bank transfers routed through a labyrinth of crypto exchanges. Shell corporations registered in places most people couldn't point to on a map. And beneath it all, the same signature move, Langford's quiet hand guiding everything from behind a curtain of smoke and mirrors. But he'd made a mistake this time. He'd underestimated the people he left standing in the ashes. I glanced out the rain-slicked window, the city lights distorted through the glass like broken stars. I thought about every conversation I'd had in this room. Every person who'd walked through that door carrying the weight of their own battle scars. And I realized something. It was never really about revenge. It was about balance. Restoring something to the world that men like Langford had stolen, truth, trust, and the belief that the game didn't always have to end with the most ruthless man standing on top. In the end, every empire built on deception eventually collapses under the weight of its own lies. And when it does, it's not always with the roar of a headline or the spectacle of a courtroom. Sometimes, it's the quiet sound of a door closing behind a man who refuses to stay down. Sometimes, it's the voice of someone who's finally ready to write his own story. Power unchecked breeds monsters. But in every game, it's not the most brutal who wins, it's the one patient enough to outlast, and brave enough to face the truth. The board can always be reset. The pieces may fall, but the right player can always turn the game. As I sealed the documents back into the envelope and slid them into the top drawer of my desk, I smiled to myself. Langford thought the game was over. He was about to learn it had just begun.